So as we just learned in the first section of 4.4, you can only add and subtract like fractions, fractions with a common denominator. So the question is, what do you do when they're not like fractions? For example, add 5/6 plus 3/4. You can't add those the way they're written because they don't have a common denominator. So the second part of this section will be learning how to find a least common denominator. To find the least common denominator, you find the least common multiple of the two denominators. So there's going to be two methods to do this, and this explanation on this PowerPoint is kind of long. So maybe it's not even best to read it. Maybe it's best to view the examples next. So there's two different methods again. The first method is to write out the multiples of each number until you find a common multiple. Okay? So let's take a look at this. Find the least common multiple of 9 and 12. Again, least common multiple is another word for the least common denominator. It's the smallest number that both 9 and 12 go into. It's not what goes into them. So for example, you might be thinking 3 goes into both of these numbers. It's not what goes into them. It's what number they both go into. So an explanation of this would be to write out their multiples. So the multiples of 12, 12 times 1 is 12, 12 times 2 is 24, 12 times 3 is 36, and so on. Okay, now let's list the multiples of 9. 9 times 1, 9 times 2, 9 times 3, 9 times 4, and so on. We can stop right here because we can see they have a common multiple of 36, and 36 is the smallest one. It's called the least common multiple. Okay? So the least common multiple is between 9 and 12 is 36. It's the smallest number that they both go into. This would be our common denominator that we'd want to use if we wanted to add two fractions with denominators of 9 and 12. Okay, so an example of this, looks like I gave away the answers here, 5/6 and 3/4. If you write out the multiples of 6, it goes 6, 12, 18, 24, and so on. The first one that 4 goes into is 12. So the smallest number that 6 and 12 go into, 6 and 4 go into, is 12. So the least common denominator, the smallest number that we can make this, so they both have the same fraction, same denominator, or like fractions, is 12. Okay? So in order to add these fractions together, we would have to rewrite them with the common denominator of 12, because then they would have then they would be like fractions, and we could add them together. And this is what we're going to do in the next section, section 4.5. So 7/8 and 5/12. Our denominators are 8 and 12. If you list out the factors of 12, 12, 24, 36, and so on. If you think about it, which one does 8 go into? 8 goes into 24. If you want to list them out for 8, 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24. Our least common denominator would be 24, also called the least common multiple. So why don't you try to do letter C? Find the least common denominator between 11/12 and 7/20 using this first method. Now this first method doesn't always work very well. So let's look at letter D here. Find the least common denominator between 72 and 60. Listing out the multiples of 72 is hard. 72, 144, 200 and something, okay? It's hard. It's not even worth our time. So there's a second method on how to do this. Okay, so that second method is using prime factorizations. To do this second method, you write out the prime factorizations of each number. Those are the factor trees. Okay, then find each different prime factor from step 1 and circle the greatest number of times that each factor occurs. I'll explain what that means because that's kind of confusing just by reading that. And then the LCM is the product of these circled factors. So let's do a couple examples of this because that's kind of confusing. So find the LCM of 72 and 60. This is the problem that we were just doing. So if you write 72 out, and 60 out, 72 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. This is true again because if you remember our prime factorizations, 72 is 9 times 8, 9 is 3 times 3, they're both prime. 8 is 4 times 2, or 2 times 4, and 4 is 2 times 2. Okay, so you can see that 72 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Same with 60. 60, remember you can use anything you want here, maybe 10 times 6. You could use 2 times 30 or anything else that multiplies to 60. 10 is 5 times 2, and 6 is 2 times 3. So 60 is 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. Okay, so those are the prime factorizations. Next, what you do is you multiply the most factors from each prime number. So this one has 3 2's. This one only has 2 2's. You multiply the most. You use the most. So 2 times 2 times 2. This one has 3 2's. This one only has 2 3's. This one only has 1 3. So we use the one with the most. 2 3's. This one has one prime factor of 5. This one doesn't have any 5's. So the most 5's would be 5. So multiply these together. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 8 times 9 is 72. And 72 times 5, I believe, is 360. Your least common denominator would be 360. Okay, so let's look at the example shown here on the one we were just doing. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so again, here's how they explain it. 72 and 60. 72 has 3 2's. 60 only has 2 2's, so use the most, the greatest number of prime factors. 72 has 2 3's. 60 only has 1 3, so we use the 2 3's. 60 has 5. 72 doesn't have any, so we use 5. So you do 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 5, and you get 360. Let's look at another example with that. Find the LCD, the least common denominator, of 1/15, 5/18, and 53 over 54. Again, in order to add these together, we would have to have a common denominator, where they would have to be like fractions. So that's why we're finding the least common denominator. So to do that, we would break these out again. I'm not going to show them out on the board this time. 15 is 3 times 5. 18 is 2 times 3 times 3, using your factor trees. And 54 is 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. So let's start with the 2's. This one has 1 2. This one has 1 2. This one doesn't have any 2's. We need to use the one with the most 2's, which is only 1 2. Okay, so we only use the 1 2. You could circle this one or that one. For the 3's, this one has 2 3's. This one has 3 3's. This one has the most, so we use the 3 3's. There's only one other prime factor, and it's a 5. This one has 1 5, no 5's, and no 5's, so we have to use the one with the most, the 5. So if you multiply those together, you would get a LCD of 270, or the least common multiple is 270. 270 is the smallest number these three factors go into, or these three denominators go into. Okay, let me know if you have any questions on that, because that second example is kind of hard, that second method, but it saves you a lot of time than having to write out all the factors of 54 and try to figure out, or the multiples of 54, and trying to figure out which one 18 and 15 go into. Alright, so how do we do this when there's letters involved? Well, the same method applies. 5 is just 5, x is just x, and x cubed is x times x times x. So use the highest of each one, a 5. X, or x times x times x. Well, x times x times x is more than just x. Remember, use the most of each. So the LCD, or the least common denominator, will be 5x cubed. All these three denominators would go into 5x cubed. Okay, let's look at letter G. 2/3, 3 over x squared, and 5 over 2x cubed. Again, 3 is just 3. X squared is x times x. 2x cubed is 2 times x times x times x. So you'd use the 3, because there's only one 3, there's only one 2. If you're trying to figure out, should I use 2x's or 3x's, you always use the most. So x times x times x. So your least common denominator is 6x cubed. Okay? So why don't you try to do letter H on your paper? Find the LCD of 5 over 14x and 7 over 10x squared. Again, you have to break 14 down and 10 down and go from there. Please bring that one to class. Even if you're not sure how to do it, try it and we'll go over it if you have any questions. Alright, so now that we know how to find the least common denominator, how do you rewrite fractions with that common denominator? Here's an explanation how you'll see it in the book. A over b equals a over b times c over c. So you get a times c over b times c. Now that's kind of confusing. What are they talking about? So let's take a look at some examples to explain that. So let's say we had 3/4, like we had in our original problem up here, and we wanted to write that with the denominator of 20. Now in that problem we would want to write it with 12, but let's say for some reason we needed to rewrite it with our common denominator of 20. So what you do is you look at it. You had a denominator of 4, we want it to be 20. So to do that, you'd have to multiply by 5. 4 times 5 is 20. If you multiply the denominator by 5, then you need to multiply the numerator by 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So this would be the same thing as 15 over 20. 3/4 is the same thing as 15 over 20. It's just not reduced. It's unsimplified. And the reason we unsimplify it is so we can get a common denominator. So in the next section, we can add them together. Let's look at another one. Before we do this one, let's take a look at this one on the board. Letter B on your sheet. 2 over 5 equals what over 15? Okay, so we have 2/5, and in order to add this together with another one, we want to rewrite it as something over 15. So to do this, we need to figure out how we went from 5 to 15. Well, we multiply by 3. 5 times 3 is 15. So in order for it to stay the same fraction, we need to multiply the numerator by the same number, 3. 2 times 3 is 6. 6/15 is the same fraction as 2/5. It's just not simplified anymore. And again, we unsimplify it so we can add it together with another like fraction that has a denominator of 15, which we'll do next section. Okay, so why don't you try to do letter C on your paper. 9x over 11 equals what over 44? Again, that x will just come along in the numerator. For letter D, it says 4 equals blank over 9. Remember, 4 is 4 over 1. So 4 over 1 equals what over 9? So to go from 1 to 9, we'd have to multiply by 9. If you multiply the numerator by 9, you need to multiply the if you multiply the denominator by 9, you need to multiply the numerator by 9. So 4 over 1 is the same thing as 36 over 9, because 36 divided by 9 is 4. And one more, 8 over 3x equals what over 24x? So to go from 3x to 24x, you would need to multiply by 8. So multiply the numerator by 8, and you'd get 64 over 24x. Okay, so that's how you rewrite fractions with common denominators. So that's the second half of section 4.4. Please do those couple problems that I asked you to do for class, and then let me know if you have any questions, and you'll have time in class to work on your homework. Thank you, and on to the next video.